Hello and welcome back to The Wealth Whisperer. Today I'm on a bit of a mission and, to be honest, a bit of a rant because, in my opinion, there are nowhere near enough people who understand how our monetary system works in the world. And to be quite honest with you, if they did, it would basically create uproar, outrage, and uprising. And I think it's important for more and more people to know and understand so that we can learn how to play them at their own game, right? So I'm talking about debt slavery today. Yeah, it's going to be a bit of a heavy one, but I'm going to make it as lighthearted as possible, hopefully. Because the truth of it is that we live in a debt-based society. When I was very young, used to ponder this question. I know, crazy, right, for a young one. I used to think to myself, who decides how much money is in the world? And I remember asking my dad once, and he tried to answer as best he could, but to be quite honest, I don't think he really knew or understood it either. There was not the internet, there wasn't anything really written about it, and it seemed quite cloak and dagger in those days about how the world of money, finances, the economy worked. So I'm going to see if I can explain it to you today as best I possibly can, how money is created in our modern world. So a debt-based economy basically means that a significant portion of the money supply is actually created through loans and debt, basically. And that economic growth is heavily reliant on the continual creation and servicing of that debt. I mean, that's pretty mind-blowing, right? That's like, okay, what? Why? How does that work? So what it basically means is as soon as you apply for a loan of some kind, a mortgage, a student loan, a car loan, a credit card, etc., that is the point at which the money is created for you. Literally, numbers on a screen. That's it. And that then creates a corresponding debt obligation where you have to pay it back with your hard-earned hours of time, energy, and value to obviously gain your wage or your money through your business, etc., and pay that debt back, which was created out of, oh, hang on a minute. Oh, yeah, nowhere. What? Sounds like a big con to me. How about you? So let's dive a little bit deeper, how this actually works. So money creation through debt. So as I've just mentioned, in a debt-based society, the vast majority of the money is created when banks make loans. And when a bank approves a loan, it essentially creates new money that's then given to the borrower, i.e. you and I, along with a matching amount of debt. That's what I've just mentioned to you. The role of what's called fractional reserve banking is what is at play here. Okay, I'm going to very, very briefly describe what fractional reserve banking is. I mean, this is like, what is going on? So it relies on this, where banks only need to keep a fraction, that's why it's called fractional reserve banking, of their deposits, i.e. the money you and I put into the bank, on reserve. They only need to keep a fraction of it in their reserves, in their bank, but they can lend out the rest of it. Okay, so this allows banks to create a much larger amount of money than they physically hold, right? So I'm going to give you a little bit of a breakdown. So for example, if a bank has a 10% reserve requirement, i.e. they receive a £1,000 or $1,000 or €1,000 deposit into the bank, they might only have to keep 10% of that. So that's, £100 or $100 or €100, but they can lend out £900, dollars or euros out to somebody else. But get this, the borrower, so the person borrowing that money, the money that's been lent out, can then spend that $900, pounds, euros, whatever currency you're talking about, which could then actually be deposited into another bank and they could do the same thing. Okay, so then they would keep $90 in reserve and then lend out the rest. I mean, this is how the money supply continues to expand, basically on the back of not a lot. Okay, and this system basically relies on the continual creation of debt and the need for growth. So it needs to be constantly growing. The debt needs to be constantly growing to be able to service the interest payments on the debt. If the economy stagnates, if it kind of comes to a bit of a standstill, or worse still, even contracts, it can actually become potentially difficult to repay debts, can't it? If the economy shrinks, we all find it harder to pay our bills, to service debts and to buy things. And that potentially leads to financial instability. And to be quite honest, the fact that it needs further growth, it creates this consumer-led world where there's a constant need to drive the urge for more. That's actual insanity, right? So the impact on the economic activity about this is that the need for the economic growth to service the debt can lead to a focus on consumption and potential over-reliance on borrowing. So people get too used to borrowing money, which can obviously then create economic imbalances and vulnerabilities. And I'm not being funny. We're not just talking about individuals like you and I. We're talking about governments, countries. They all borrow far too much to be able to spend on stuff. And it's basically created this monster. And I can't really get my head around how this actually works. I mean, if we look at perhaps another way of looking at this, some economists argue that a debt-based economy is unsustainable in the long term, and that it can lead to increased instability, inequality, and economic crises. But there are other experts that think that it's perfectly fine and it's going to carry on growing exponentially. And I mean, I've heard crazy figures about future borrowing in different countries that is just going to go into the trillions and trillions and trillions. And, where does it end? Where does it go pop? Right? So the whole system is based on this debt-based business model. So the ones who feel that it's a little bit more positive in terms of creating debt say that it's actually a good thing because it stimulates economic activity and it stimulates funding investments. So, perhaps here what I wanted to do is to simplify it a little bit, to kind of give you a glimpse as to how the money system works. But this is what happens. You've heard the term before, perhaps. Have you heard the term wage slaves? All of us who are working to earn money, even working in a business or growing a business, we're all working to earn money to be able to pay for things. But the term wage slave is literally that. We are literally economic slaves because we have to earn money to be able to afford to buy things, to be able to afford to borrow money to pay for stuff that we don't have and couldn't have without the debt. Yet it keeps us in that absolute loop, that spiral of having to borrow to have the things that we want, need, and are encouraged to buy in our lives. And the reason that we are slaves to that debt is because we have to use our own time, energy, and skills to pay back money, which is created out of nothing by a banking system, which, in my opinion, is entirely fraudulent. I mean, it's a big statement to make, I know. However, the more I've drilled into it and the more I've found out about it, there's literally no other conclusion that I can make about this. Let's face it, if you or I tried to print money, right, and use it to pay for things, it wouldn't be too long before we were put behind bars. So just wondering how the big players get away with this. Well, perhaps it's because they get to make up the rules of the game. So I hope that's been able to shed some light on the subject of the money supply, how the monetary system, I know it's simplified, but it's given you a little bit of a glimpse, perhaps a little bit of insight that you might not have had before, of how the world of money works. So please stay tuned to learn more about how to work with it, how to make the most of what you've got, and how to survive and actually thrive in these crazy old times, in these uncharted times, in terms of your cash, in terms of your money. So I hope that's been enlightening today. And of course, I very much look forward to seeing you on the next show. Take care till then.